Oh, oh, my heart, I need you to sit down if you are not already sitting, because I went into your energy today, and the first thing I felt, before I even asked about love, before I even oriented toward the relational dimension of what I was reading for you, was warmth, overwhelming warmth coming from somewhere outside of you, moving toward you in the specific and intentional form of something that has a direction, and the direction is you. I want to stay with that warmth for a moment before I tell you what it is and where it is coming from and what it means for the specific chapter of your life that is about to begin in the form that this reading is describing as the someone coming to spoil you and the lifetime together and the deep dive love that the title is promising in the most expansive and generous form of everything that phrase can mean for the person it is meant for, which is you, reading this right now. Welcome, my beautiful soul, and let me tell you everything. Um, First, I need to acknowledge something about you, something that I feel in your energy and that I will not rush past. In the excitement of delivering the love message that this reading is carrying, because you deserve to be seen fully, not only in the part of you that is about to receive something extraordinary, but in the part of you that has been carrying something difficult. In the period that preceded this moment, I feel a specific kind of loneliness in your energy, not the dramatic and visible loneliness of someone who is obviously alone and who announces that aloneness in ways that people around them can see and respond to and offer comfort for the quiet kind, the specific and interior form of someone who is surrounded by people and still feels in the most private dimension of their experience that there is a particular kind of scene and a particular kind of chosen and a particular kind of held that none of the surrounding people are currently providing in the form that the loneliness is pointing toward as the missing thing, that the surrounding people, with all their presence and goodness and care, are not quite delivering in the specific and particular form that the loneliness knows it is missing. Um, you have been longing for a love that goes deeper than what has been available to you. In the recent period, a love that is not afraid of the full version of you, not the managed and presented version that you offer to most people, in the careful and considered form of someone who has learned that not everyone can handle everything you are all at once without being overwhelmed or intimidated or retreating into a smaller form of the connection than the one you were hoping for. When you offered the full version and found it was more than the other person could stay present for, you have made yourself smaller in some connections, in the specific and effortful form of someone who is managing the full version of who they are into something more receivable by the specific person they are with in the specific situation. And that managing has been exhausting in the quiet and unannounced way of something you do not complain about because complaining about it would require explaining why you were managing in the first place, which would require the conversation about the full version of you that you were managing away from in the first place. Um, Spirit is showing me what you have been telling yourself in the quiet interior of the recent period when the loneliness was loudest and the managing was most tiring, and the particular kind of seen and chosen and held was most noticeably absent from the connections that were available. You have been telling yourself that maybe the love you are longing for is unrealistic, or that you are asking for too much, or that the specific combination of things you want from love is not a combination that exists in a real and available person. In the real and available world that you are moving through right now, in the specific circumstances of your specific life, and sometimes in the most tired and most lonely moments, you have wondered if something about you makes the deep dive love more difficult to find than it seems to be for other people who appear to find it more easily or more naturally or without the particular difficulty that you seem to encounter in the connections that have not yet become the deep dive love you are longing for. Spirit wants me to speak directly to that wondering, and I am going to do it in the most direct and honest form available, because it deserves a direct answer rather than a gentle deflection into something more comfortable but less honest. Nothing about you makes the deep dive love harder to find. What is actually happening is that the depth of what you are capable of in love and the depth of what you are looking for in love require a person who is also capable of depth in the equivalent and matching form of someone who can go as deep as you go without retreating or being overwhelmed or needing you to come back up to the shallower water where they are more comfortable and less challenged by the full depth of what loving you requires. That person who can match your depth is rarer than average depth people, not because something is wrong with you, but because the rarity is a function of the depth, and the depth is a function of who you are, which is someone who loves in the fullest and deepest form that loving takes, when it is done by someone who does not hold back or protect themselves from the full weight of it, or choose the shallow end, because the shallow end is safer and less exposing and less likely to produce the specific pain that loving deeply always risks. For someone who is willing to go to the depth it requires, the person who is coming to spoil you can match your depth. That is the first and most important thing I want to say about them before anything else about who they are, or where they are coming from, or what the lifetime together looks like in the specific and particular form that their arrival is going to produce. They can match your depth without retreating, without needing you to come back up, without being overwhelmed by the full version of you in the specific and important form of someone who has done enough of their own interior work to not be destabilized by the full depth of yours, but to be drawn into it in the moving and steady form of someone who finds your depth not overwhelming, but home. Let me describe the spoiling because it is in the title and it deserves its specific attention in the honest and grounded form of what spoiling actually means. When it is offered by someone who is capable of matching your depth and who has decided that you are the person they want to offer it to. The spoiling is not material, though there is some of that too, in the specific and generous form of someone who wants your daily life to feel easier and more beautiful in the practical and tangible dimension of the things they do and the things they give and the ways they attend to what you need before you have even named it, in the anticipating and caring form of someone who pays enough attention to know what you need before you say it. The spoiling is primarily attention, the specific and sustained form of attention that someone gives when they are genuinely interested in every dimension of who you are, not just the interesting and impressive dimensions that most people are interested in. When they first encounter someone worth paying attention to, but the ordinary and quiet and sometimes difficult dimensions that the sustained and deep attention eventually reaches when it is given by someone who is in it for the full version rather than the presented version that most connections only access. Let me be even more specific about what I mean by the spoiling, because I feel it so clearly in your energy. That I want to name it in the exact and particular form that will make you recognize it when it arrives in your actual life, rather than passing it by because it does not look the way you imagined spoiling would look in the grand and cinematic form that the imagination sometimes pictures it in before the real form arrives, in something quieter and more personal and more specifically yours than any imagined version could be. The spoiling is someone who remembers the specific things you mention in passing without noting them as significant or expecting them to be remembered, and who brings them back to you days or weeks later in the form of something that says, I was listening, not just hearing, but actually listening to the version of you that speaks in passing about the things that matter without necessarily flagging them as the things that matter, because the specific Virgo adjacent form of someone who does not make their needs the loudest thing in any room speaks about what matters in the passing and quiet and understated way that requires a specific and attentive listener to hear correctly. This person is that listener. In the arriving and spoiling form of someone who heard what you said in passing and who comes back with it in the way that makes you feel, in the specific and moving form of that particular feeling, like you have been heard fully by someone who is paying the kind of attention that you have been paying to others for most of your life without always receiving it back in the equivalent and reciprocal form that the receiving of it now from someone who naturally and genuinely offers it will feel like in the specific and overwhelming way of something you have been longing for, finally arriving in the person who is coming to spoil you, the ordinary days, the difficult moods, the specific ways you think, and the specific things that worry you, and the specific form your joy takes when something produces it in the genuine and unmanaged form of your actual joy, rather than the presented form that you offer to people who do not yet have access to the actual version of how you are when you are fully yourself without the managing. They want the actual version in the specific and declaring form of someone who has looked at the actual version and chosen it rather than the presented version that most people encounter first. And most people choose because the presented version is what is initially available before the full version becomes accessible to someone who has been given enough time and enough trust and enough of the specific patience that the full version requires before it becomes available in the complete and genuine form that this person is arriving to find. Now, the lifetime together, because that is in the title too. And it is the most significant part of everything this reading is delivering. Today, for the specific person reading this, at this specific moment, in the specific chapter of their life that this reading is describing as the opening of something long and full and deep. A lifetime together is not just a long time. I want to say that clearly, because lifetime can sound like duration. In the simple and temporal form of a very long relationship that continues for many years, simply by continuing without the particular quality that makes the continuing feel like a lifetime rather than a long time, a lifetime together. In the form this reading is describing, is two people who keep choosing each other in the daily and ordinary and sometimes difficult form of the choosing that a real and lasting connection requires, not in the dramatic and romantic form of grand gestures and declarations, though those are present too, in the specific and generous form of someone who wants to spoil you, but in the quiet form of someone who chooses you on the ordinary Tuesday, when nothing is particularly romantic or dramatic or requiring the grand gesture, but who is simply there in the quiet and reliable form of someone who has chosen you and keeps choosing you in the daily and accumulating form that a lifetime is actually made of when it is real and sustained and the choosing kind, rather than only the beginning kind that most connections have, but that the lifetime kind continues to have long after the beginning has become the middle, and the middle is where the real choosing lives. Spirit wants me to say something to you that I feel strongly, and that I want to say directly without softening or qualifying or delivering in the gentled form. That important things sometimes arrive in when the person delivering them is afraid of how the full form will land, you deserve to be spoiled, not as a special exemption or as the gift of someone who is more deserving than others of the particular and extraordinary form of the deep dive love that is arriving for you, but as the specific and proportionate return on everything you have been offering in love for the full period of your loving life, which has been generous and attentive and deep in the specific form that your loving takes. When you love someone in the full and unprotected form that your loving is capable of taking, you have been offering the deep dive form and receiving something shallower in return in the various and specific connections of the preceding period, and the imbalance between the depth of what you offered and the depth of what was returned is the source of the specific loneliness I felt the moment I entered your energy today. Before I had even looked for it, the imbalance is about to correct in the arriving form of someone who is coming at the same depth you go, and who is coming specifically to spoil you in the attending and choosing and seeing form of someone who has recognized what the depth of what you offer actually is, and who is not intimidated by it or overwhelmed by it or looking for the shallower version of what loving you would require of someone who is choosing to love you at the full depth you deserve to be loved at. Whew. The lifetime is beginning, my beautiful soul, in the specific and arriving form of the deep dive love that the title is promising, and that your energy in the extraordinary and warmth-filled form that I felt the moment I entered it today is confirming as real and incoming and proportionate, and everything you have been quietly longing for in the specific and honest interior of your own knowing of what you need from love when it arrives in the form it deserves to arrive in, for the specific person you are, who loves in the deepest available way, and who deserves love that matches the depth completely. Before I close, I want to prepare you for something. That spirit is specifically showing me about how this love will feel when it first arrives in the real and present form of the person who is coming. It will feel unfamiliar at first, in the specific and slightly disorienting form of something that does not match what you have come to expect from love, based on the love that has been available to you in the preceding period, which was shallower and less steady, and less specifically attentive than what is arriving now. When someone loves you in the full and attending and spoiling form, and you have been accustomed to something less full and less attending and less specifically yours, the difference can feel strange before it feels safe in the specific and natural progression of someone whose nervous system has been calibrated to a different kind of love and who needs a brief adjustment period before the full and available love. Feels like something to settle into rather than something to assess for what might be wrong with it, because nothing this good has arrived before in quite this form, and the unfamiliarity of the good can produce the brief and understandable suspicion that something must be wrong with it before the settling begins and the good is allowed to simply be what it actually is, which is the arriving form of everything this reading has been describing. Let yourself settle into it. When the unfamiliarity arrives, rather than pulling back from it into the more familiar and less available form of the love that was shallower and easier to trust because its limitations were known and its depth was manageable, and the managing of it required less from the nervous system that had calibrated to it over the preceding period when the shallower love was what was available. This is deeper and better and yours in the specific and arriving form of a lifetime and a spoiling and a deep dive that has been on its way for longer than you knew toward the specific person who was always going to receive it when the time was exactly right, which is now, to go deep with you and stay and choose you and spoil you in the quiet and extraordinary and lifetime form of the love that does not retreat when it finds the depth, but goes further in, because going further in is the only direction that makes sense for someone who recognizes what you actually are and what loving you actually means in the full and unmanaged and completely you form that the deep dive love has always been waiting to find. It is finding it now in you, in the arriving form of someone who is on their way